The first thing Elara felt wasn't the pain of her broken ribs, but the cold, grasping mud of the trench trying to pull her under. She lay there like a discarded toy, her body a map of the world's casual cruelty. To the people who threw her here, she was just a ghost whose fire had been put out. Her old life, where she was a brilliant lawyer with integrity, was now a bridge burned before it was ever crossed. As the rain punished the earth, Elara's mind drifted back 20 years to a drafty hallway in the St. Jude's orphanage. She saw a skinny boy with fierce eyes named Dante. They had sat on a cold floor, sharing a single piece of bread and a dream. "One day," Dante had whispered, his small hand squeezing hers, "I will build a fortress for us. We will never be invisible again." They had made a promise in that silent space between childhood and a hard world, a promise to always find each other. But the world had been cruel. They were separated, and Elara had spent years becoming a bridge builder in the legal world, only to have her reputation destroyed by a well-orchestrated smear campaign. Now she was dying in a ditch, and the boy with the fierce eyes was just a beautiful memory from a life that was extinguished. Then, a pair of headlights cut through the dark like a camera lens focusing in sudden light. A black car, as cold and hard as chilled steel, hissed to a stop at the edge of the ravine. A man stepped out into the storm. He didn't run from the rain, he commanded it. His stillness was a form of power, and he looked down at the wreckage in the mud with the intensity of a predator at rest. He knelt in the filth, his expensive suit ruining in the clay, and reached out with a hand as steady as a surgeon's. When he brushed the wet hair from her face, Elara saw a flash of terrifying comprehension in his eyes. He didn't see a victim or a waitress. He saw the girl from the orphanage. "I have spent my whole life becoming the man who could keep his word," he whispered, his voice a melodic baritone that shook her soul. "They thought they could erase you, Elara, but I have kept our promise written in blood." He lifted her up, her fragile structure shaking against his chest. As he carried her toward the light of the car, Elara realized the demolition of her life was finally over. The boy who promised to find her was now a king, and he had come to collect his queen. When Elara opened her eyes, the punishing rain was gone. Instead, she found herself in a room filled with hushed opulence, where the air smelled of expensive, curated harmony. She lay on a bed with sheets so soft they felt like a silken thread, but her body felt like a beautifully engineered catastrophe. Every breath was a struggle, a tiny metallic cry from lungs that had almost given up in the mud. "Don't move, Elara," a voice commanded. It was a melodic baritone, smooth like aged scotch, yet it carried a stillness that was a form of power. She turned her head slowly. Dante stood by a window, looking out at a city he seemed to own. He wasn't the skinny boy from the orphanage anymore. He was a predator at rest, a man who built literal bridges between worlds of power. His face was a mask of placid control, but when he looked at her, the colors began bleeding back into his eyes. "You found me," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I never stopped looking," Dante replied, stepping closer. His steps were measured and silent on the plush carpet. He sat in a mahogany chair beside her, his fingers steepled. "I promised you a fortress, Elara. You are inside it now. No one, not even the people who systematically destroyed your reputation, can reach you here." Elara felt a cold fury rise in her chest as she remembered the well-orchestrated smear campaign that had turned her life into a grayscale existence. She had been a senior associate at a top firm, a bridge builder who believed in integrity. But Omnicorp, a corporate behemoth, had framed her for a crime she didn't commit. They had turned her ability to use language into a liability. "They took everything, Dante," she said, her knuckles white as she gripped the blanket. "They erased my father's name and left me with crippling legal debts. I had to disappear, to be invisible, just to survive." Dante leaned forward, his gaze intense and analytical. "They didn't take everything. They left you alive, and they left you with me." He reached into a leather-bound folder and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. "My team has exhumed your entire professional life. We found the bribed IT technician and the fabricated emails. It's all here, irrefutable proof of your innocence." He took her hand, his touch steady as a surgeon's. "The boy from the orphanage kept his word, Elara. I have built the strongest structure to protect you. Now I am going to help you reclaim your name and finish the fight your father started." Elara looked into his eyes and saw the flicker of someone who once commanded boardrooms. The moral calculus was simple. She was no longer a ghost. She was a witness, and she was finally home. For the next week, Elara stayed inside the gilded cage of Dante's estate, her fragile safety slowly turning into a new resolve. Dante did not just provide a bed, he provided a surgical path back to the woman she was meant to be. Every morning, he sat with her at a long mahogany table, the same kind where she had once commanded boardrooms. "Omnicorp is a corporate behemoth," Dante explained, his voice a melodic baritone that never wavered. "They use ghost armies and systematic demolition to destroy anyone in their way." He spread out the dossier his team had exhumed. "They didn't just frame you for leaking data, Elara. They used you as a strategic move on a global chessboard to stop a deal they wanted for themselves." Elara looked at the detailed digital forensics reports and felt the acid of her old life turning into the fuel for a new one. "Marcus Thorne," she whispered, the name tasting like poison. "He was the executive who orchestrated the frame-up. He's the one who hollowed out my father." Dante leaned forward, his gaze intense and analytical. "He is a predator, but he has a weak joint. He believes he is invisible because he pays men like Julian to be his voice of truth." Dante tapped a photo in the file. "But he doesn't know that the inspector on site is back." As Elara's knuckles brushed the warm linen of the table, she realized she wasn't just a witness anymore. She was the bridge builder who knew exactly where to light the fuse. "I don't want to just reclaim my name, Dante," she said, her voice quiet but gaining strength. "I want to deconstruct every lie they ever told. I want to lay the truth bare until their empire collapses." A small, rare smile touched Dante's lips. "Then we start tomorrow. You won't be a ghost in a waitress uniform anymore. You will be my head of international negotiations." He stood and handed her a charcoal gray suit, a relic from her former life that he had recovered. "It's time to step back into the light, Elara. The world you tried to hide from is about to start watching you." Elara took the suit, her hands steady. She was no longer a beautifully engineered catastrophe. She was becoming a fortress. The morning of the meeting, Elara stood before the mirror in her charcoal gray suit, a relic from her former life that now felt like armor. She was no longer the ghost in a crisp white shirt serving drinks. Her hands were steady, the hands of a builder ready to re-engage with the world on her own terms. Beside her, Dante looked like a predator at rest, his stillness a form of power as he prepared to walk his queen into the heart of the enemy's territory. They arrived at the towering glass and steel monolith where the negotiation was to take place. As Elara walked through the revolving doors, her reflection moving with her across the polished black marble floor, she felt the gravitational field of the room shift. She wasn't just a witness today, she was the bridge builder who knew exactly where the weak joints were hidden. The boardroom was a gilded cage filled with men who believed they held the superior position. At the head of the table sat Marcus Thorne, the man who had systematically destroyed her reputation and hollowed out her father. He looked up as Dante entered, but his face was a mask of placid control until his eyes landed on Elara. For a single, searing second, the room went silent. Marcus's pupils contracted like a camera lens focusing in sudden, brilliant light. He didn't see a waitress or a victim. He saw the senior associate he thought he had eliminated. The color drained from his face as he realized the ghost had returned. "Gentlemen," Dante began, his voice a melodic baritone that vibrated through the floor. "I believe you know my new head of international negotiations, Elara Wallace." Elara stepped forward, her command of the material absolute. She didn't wait for them to process the sudden, shocking plot twist. She opened a leather-bound folder and began to lay the truth bare on the polished mahogany table. "I've spent the last 2 years observing from a place no one thought to look," she said, her voice quiet but gaining strength. "And I've found that your architecture of the deal is built on treacherous bricks." She looked Marcus directly in the eyes. "Your voice of truth is a lie, and I am the inspector who is going to deconstruct it piece by piece." The confrontation was not loud, but it was surgical and utterly devastating. As Elara spoke, she could feel her father's legacy acting as a foundation rather than a weight. She was no longer invisible. She was a fortress. The atmosphere in the room shifted from hushed opulence to a menacing drone of suppressed panic. Marcus Thorne's face was a mask of placid control, but Elara saw the tremor in his hands as he realized his voice of truth was being dismantled. He was a predator who had been cornered, and she knew he would not go down without a deliberate, systematic demolition of whatever was left of her. "You think a suit and a new title make you a bridge builder again?" Marcus sneered, his voice flat and hard like a sheet of ice. He gestured to his own leather-bound folder. "You are still a disbarred lawyer with crippling legal debts. If you intervene in this deal, the consequences will be a new, more dangerous form of exile." Dante stood by the window, his stillness a form of power as he watched the moral calculus play out. He didn't speak. He let Elara wield the truth for herself. "I'm not afraid of public humiliation anymore, Marcus," Elara said, her voice quiet but gaining strength. "I've lived in the grayscale existence you created for 2 years. I was a ghost in a trench because of your well-orchestrated smear campaign." Suddenly, Marcus smiled, a small, rare smile that sent a cold nod into Elara's stomach. "Then perhaps you'll enjoy the final betrayal. We've just received a fabricated report that your father's bridge project was condemned due to your own leaked data." It was a trap, a surgical attempt to weaken the foundations of her resolve. For a fraction of a second, Elara felt like a fragile structure about to collapse, but then she remembered the simple silver chain around her neck and the legacy her father had instilled in her. "A bridge with a single weak joint is a beautifully engineered catastrophe, Marcus," she quoted her father with hyper-focused intensity. "And you are that weak joint. My father didn't falsify stress reports, you did." She reached into her own dossier and pulled out the sworn affidavit from the bribed IT technician. "This is the irrefutable proof of my innocence and your criminal espionage." The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus stared at the black and white evidence, his expression vacant with shock. He had assumed he needed a bridge to win, but he was standing on a structure that Elara had already deconstructed. As the security guards moved to flank Marcus, Elara finally let out the breath she had been holding. She wasn't just visible now, she was powerful and whole. The fallout from the meeting was like a systematic demolition. Within hours, the irrefutable proof Elara had presented began to dismantle Marcus Thorne's reputation. News of the well-orchestrated smear campaign hit the wires, and the corporate behemoth of Omnicorp began to shake. But as the detonation of the truth leveled her enemies, a new, scary drone of danger began to circle Dante's estate. "Marcus is a predator who has lost his gilded cage," Dante said that evening. He was standing on the balcony, his stillness a form of power against the darkening sky. "He has nothing left but cold fury. He will try to erase the witness before the final verdict is delivered in court." Elara walked up beside him, her hands steady as they rested on the cool stainless steel railing. "I spent 2 years being a ghost, Dante. I'm not going back into the shadows, not even for him." Dante turned to her, his intense and analytical gaze softening. He reached out and touched the simple silver chain around her neck. "Do you remember the orphanage promise, Elara? I told you I would build a fortress for us, but a fortress is only as strong as the integrity of the people inside it." "We are whole now, Dante," she whispered, her voice melodic with a newfound peace. "We aren't those scared children sharing a piece of bread anymore." Suddenly, the hushed opulence of the night was shattered by the mechanical heartbeat of a helicopter approaching the estate. Dante's peripheral gaze caught the flicker of movement in the trees below. His men, silent final verdicts, moved into position instantly. "The demolition is coming to our front door," Dante said, his voice flat and hard like a sheet of ice. He pulled a small, sleek device from his pocket. "He thinks he can hollow out my home like he did your father's legacy. He's about to find out that this structure is made of more than just stone and glass." He looked at Elara, his pupils contracting with a terrifying comprehension of the stakes. "Stay behind me. The inspector has done her job. Now it's time for the king to defend the queen." As the first brilliant light of a searchlight swept across the balcony, Elara didn't feel like a fragile structure. She felt like the foundation of everything Dante had built. The moral calculus was finished. The fight for their legacy had truly begun. The helicopter's searchlight swept over the estate like a giant accusing eye, turning the dark gardens into a sudden brilliant light show. The menacing drone of the rotors drowned out the sound of the crickets, and Elara felt the fragile structure of her new piece being threatened. But this time, she didn't run. She stood beside Dante, her knuckles white on the railing, but her heart steady. "They are coming for the dossier," Dante said, his voice flat and hard like a sheet of ice. "Marcus Thorne knows that if those files reach the final verdict in court, his empire is a beautifully engineered catastrophe." The first detonation wasn't a bomb, but the sound of the front gates being systematically demolished by a heavy truck. Men in tactical gear, the ghost army Marcus had hired, began to swarm the grounds. Dante turned to Elara, his intense and analytical eyes searching hers. "I have to lead the defense. You need to go to the vault in the basement. It's a fortress within a fortress." "No," Elara said, her command of the situation surprising even herself. "Marcus doesn't just want the files. He wants to erase the witness. If I hide, I'm just a ghost again. But I know the architecture of this estate, Dante. You told me your father helped build it." She remembered the blueprints she had seen in the leather-bound folder earlier. "There is a weak joint in the security perimeter near the old bridge. If they get through there, your men will be flanked." Dante paused, his pupils contracting. He realized she wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was his chief strategist. "Tell me," he commanded. Using her brilliant mind, Elara explained how to redirect the security feed to create a digital trap. She was deconstructing the enemy's movements before they even made them. "Go," Dante told his lead guard, his voice a melodic baritone filled with pride. "She's the inspector on site tonight." As Dante moved to the front line, Elara sat at the mechanical heartbeat of the security monitors. She watched the flicker of the thermal cameras, her fingers steady on the keyboard. She wasn't just visible now, she was the one controlling the light. Outside, the confrontation began, but Elara felt a quiet sense of peace. She was no longer a casualty in an undeclared war. She was the architect of the counter-strike, and the boy from the orphanage was finally fighting by her side. The siege had reached a fever pitch. Outside, the menacing drone of the helicopter was replaced by the sharp, rhythmic cracks of security measures holding the line. Inside the command center, Elara watched the monitors with hyper-focused intensity. Suddenly, one screen went dark, then another. "Dante," she whispered into the comms, her voice a tiny metallic cry against the static. "The weak joint near the kitchen. Someone just deconstructed the electronic lock from the inside. There's a traitor in the house." Before Dante could respond, the heavy, polished steel doors of the command center hissed open. Elara turned, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the mahogany desk. Marcus Thorne stepped into the room. He wasn't wearing his charcoal gray suit anymore. He looked like a predator who had finally stopped pretending to be a businessman. His eyes were intense and analytical, scanning the room until they landed on the dossier sitting next to Elara. "The ghost thinks she's a queen now," Marcus sneered, his voice flat and hard like a sheet of ice. He held a silenced pistol with surgical precision. "I should have stayed in the trench, Elara. It's a much quieter place to disappear than a billionaire's estate." Elara stood tall, her command of her own fear absolute. "You're too late, Marcus. The irrefutable proof isn't just in that folder. I've already uploaded the digital trail to every major news outlet and the federal prosecutor. The detonation has already happened." Marcus's face became a mask of cold fury. "Then I'll just have to erase the source before I leave." He raised the weapon, but before he could pull the trigger, the shadows in the corner shifted. Dante emerged from the dark like a predator at rest who had finally decided to strike. With a movement as seamless as a predator's pounce, he disarmed Marcus before the man could even blink. Dante didn't kill him. Instead, he forced Marcus to look at the screens. On every monitor, the public humiliation was unfolding. Stocks were crashing. Headlines were calling for Marcus's arrest. The structure of his life was undergoing a systematic demolition in real time. "The final verdict isn't death, Marcus," Dante said, his voice a melodic baritone that sounded like a death knell. "It's being invisible. You are going to a place where no one will ever know your name again." As the security guards led a broken Marcus away, Dante turned to Elara. His stillness was no longer scary, it was a fortress. "The boy from the orphanage kept his promise," Elara whispered, the colors finally bleeding back into her world for good. In the days following Marcus Thorne's systematic demolition, the estate returned to a state of hushed opulence, but the air felt lighter, as if a poison had been drawn from the lungs of the house. Elara sat in the mahogany library, looking at the leather-bound folder that contained not just legal documents, but the history of her life. Dante entered the room, his steps measured and silent on the plush carpet. He wasn't wearing his predator mask today. He looked at Elara with a softness that was a rare, beautiful plot twist in his usually cold world. "The final verdict came in this morning," he said, his voice a melodic baritone. "The court has reinstated your license. The smear campaign is officially dead. You are no longer disbarred, Elara. You are visible again." Elara felt a quiet sense of peace settle over her. "Thank you, Dante. But there's something I don't understand. How did you find me in that trench? The world is a big place, and I was a ghost." Dante sat across from her, his fingers steepled. "Do you remember the orphanage promise? You gave me something that day. A small stone you found in the garden. You told me it was a foundation stone for our future fortress." Elara's breath hitched. She remembered. It was a simple piece of quartz worn smooth by the rain. Dante reached into his pocket and pulled out a small polished object. It was the same stone, now set into a cool stainless steel base. "I never let it go, Elara. When you disappeared, I used every resource I had to track the digital trail of that stone. I knew you would keep a piece of your father's integrity with you. I found the jeweler you sold your mother's ring to 3 years ago to pay your father's medical bills. He told me about the woman who carried a small white stone in her pocket like a talisman." The moral calculus of her life finally added up. Dante hadn't just found her because of a dossier, he had found her because of the small, invisible threads of their shared past. "You kept it," she whispered, a flicker of a tear in her eye. "I kept everything," Dante replied. "But there is one more thing you need to see, something your father engineered into the foundations of his final bridge, the one Marcus Thorne tried to destroy." He handed her a sealed envelope with her father's handwriting on it. It was a legacy she hadn't known existed, a secret joint in the story that was about to change everything. The sealed envelope felt heavy in Elara's hands, a relic that had survived the systematic demolition of her family's name. As she opened it, a single set of engineering blueprints slid out onto the polished mahogany table. These weren't for a city bridge, but for a private fortress, the very estate where they now stood. "My father didn't just build this for your family, Dante," Elara whispered, her voice melodic with realization. Her eyes traced the hyper-focused intensity of his drawings. "He built a hidden chamber into the foundation. He called it the Vault of Integrity. He told me once that the strongest structures are not made of steel, but of courage." Dante stood, his stillness a form of power as he led her to the heart of the house. Beneath the mahogany library, behind a polished steel panel that required the small white stone from the orphanage to act as a key, a door hissed open. Inside was the final verdict her father had left behind. It wasn't gold or money. It was a digital trail of every corporate behemoth that had ever tried to bribe him, including the irrefutable proof that could bring down the entire Omnicorp board of directors. Her father hadn't been hollowed out. He had been waiting for his daughter to be strong enough to finish the reconstruction. "He knew you would come back for me," Dante murmured, his hand steady as he rested it on her shoulder. He knew the boy from the orphanage would keep his promise. The moral calculus was finally complete. Elara wasn't just visible, powerful, and whole. She was the architect of a new world. 6 months later, the menacing drone of the past was gone. Elara stood in a sharp dark blue suit at the head of a new global foundation dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and exiled experts. She was no longer a ghost or a waitress. She was the voice of truth that the world could no longer ignore. Dante stood by her side, no longer a predator at rest, but a partner in integrity. They had built their fortress, not with walls to hide behind, but with bridges to help others cross from ruin to redemption. As Elara looked at her hands resting on the table, she saw they were steady. They were the hands of a builder. She looked at Dante and saw the skinny boy from the orphanage who had grown into a king. "We did it," she whispered. "No," Dante replied, his melodic baritone filled with a quiet sense of peace. "The bridge is finally open, Elara. Let's see where it leads." The story of the ghost in the trench had become the legend of the queen of the city. And for the first time in her life, the colors weren't just bleeding back in. They were brilliant, permanent, and beautiful.